the other button so that it's the other button.
Okay, now there are. It's always good when things come in pairs, you know. In physics we call it duality. And duality is very important. When things come in three, it's even better, but it's dangerous. Right. I'm a scientist, and science is not really important in life. It's just aperitif. So real life starts, and things that are interesting in real life start with mysterious. But mysterious is not enough. We need science to check which part of the mysterious are, I would say, true, and which parts of the mysterious are only the beginning of the real search. I'm a scientist, and as you hear, my area of expertise is just some part of theoretical physics, a little bit of mathematics, maybe more than a little bit. And I am also interested in philosophy, I am not a mystic, but I am interested in mysticism, but that's what is additional. I would not say I do it only in spare time. In fact, probably half of my time in my whole life was devoted to studying the mysterious things. Reading, I mean. I do nothing practically of the mysterious. Perhaps except that sometimes I have intuitions. The intuitions direct my research, and the intuitions really we don't know where they come from. That's part of the mysterious. Now, science, the science that I am engaged in, is an exact science. So when we prove our theorems, when we state laws of physics, we tend to be sure that what we say is true, or at least approximately true. It may be improved later. But there is also this mysterious part, and in the mysterious part we rely on speculations. Scientists quite often speculate, but you must remember that most of speculations happen to be wrong at the very end. So I will talk about both subjects, about science, and then I will speculate. When I talk about science, I am ready to defend against any audience, however smart, you know, whatever their titles, I am going to defend it. There may be an error, but then there will be a discussion who is making an error. But when it comes to speculations, most of the speculations happen to be wrong. Only some happen to be true and happen to lead to something new and valuable. So please take it into account that when I go beyond my area of expertise, I am speculating. I mean, I am speculating the best way I know. What I will tell you is the result of all my research and studies and what I was doing myself. Okay? But it may happen to be wrong. But I don't think it's wrong. I mean, and even if it is wrong, it will lead towards something that perhaps will prove to be true. Okay? One more thing that I would like to add, that as a scientist, a lot of my research and publications have been done in collaboration with other scientists. I am not one of those scientists that sit alone, do something, tell nobody, put in the drawers, you know, scared to publish or to tell their results because they will be stolen. Yes, this happens. But I am of the kind that I don't care if things are stolen from me. I am happy, in fact, because when things are stolen from me, it means they are good, right? And also, I am avoiding those areas of research that I consider dangerous for humanity. For instance, from what I am doing as a physicist, there is an easy way to go into the direction of creating new technology that will sell new weapons, new devices for listening, you know, quantum cryptography. Okay, it would be easy for me to do it. But then I become a slave. I don't want to be a slave. Therefore, I drift into those areas that lead to the subjects that have no use at all, like consciousness. I mean, who will steal my ideas about consciousness? No one, okay? Life after death, who cares? So many of my, so I am open-minded and I am completely open. And perhaps for this reason, I was half of my career I spent not in Poland when I grew and when I got my titles, but half of my career I spent abroad in research centers all over the world on invitation of other scientists because they liked me. Okay, so they were inviting me, paying for my stay and travel and so. I didn't have really to ask. They liked me, I liked them. I like to travel and to talk and collaborate with different people. Now, how do I move to the next slide? So, how do I go? It doesn't want to go. This will go? No. This will go. Oh, so here is just to start with the story of my international adventures. So you can see it all started in 1970 when I got my PhD. And right after my PhD, which was devoted to rather esoteric quantum physics, I was invited to Center of National Research Center in Marseille. And then, of course, evidently I was liked there because I was invited again and again many years. The subject there was hyperdimensional physics. Maybe I should tell you that physicists do not call it hyperdimensional physics. If you will use the term hyperdimensional physics, no physicist will understand what you are talking about. Okay? This is for to sell to the public. We use this term hyperdimensional physics. Then in 1975, I got invited to the University of Stony Brook. That was my first trip to USA, invited by Nobel Prize winner Chinese Chen-Ning Yang. Okay. And I was working in principle on the subject of magnetic monopoles. Magnetic monopoles is a magnet that has only one pole, say north, no south pole. I mean, you don't see such magnets in nature, but there are speculations that they exist. And there are also indications that they exist. And they are mysterious, and they may be responsible for many strange phenomena. I will talk about that later. But I must confess here that in Stony Brook, in my half of the time I was working on mathematics and physics and magnetic monopoles, and the other half of the time I was spending at the library of the university studying everything what was available there about paranormal. Somehow people learn about that and they didn't like it, so I was never invited again to this place. Well, there was gossip circulate around physicists. Oh, this Jadczyk, you know, he is strange, you know. Yeah, he is good, but he talks about paranormal. Okay, then there was Hamburg, the accelerator center in Hamburg. They accelerate particles and see what happens. Some of that was military related, but this was undercover. Most of that research was open, but there was also Institute of Theoretical Physics there, and we were talking again about hyperdimensional physics and quantum physics. Then I spent good time at the University of Göttingen. University of Göttingen is very important because this is where general relativity theory started. That is where a lot of quantum theories started. But that was before the Second World War. After the Second World War, the University of Göttingen was not any more the same as it was before. There was a collapse of German science, in fact. Okay, then there was an important part of my career when I was in the Great Accelerator Center of Europe in CERN, Geneva. Again, there I was working on hyperdimensional physics, and Geneva, I must tell, had a wonderful English bookshop. So every week, I was spending some money in this bookshop, looking for books by Uspensky, Gurdjieff, and such things. So while in Geneva, on one side I was working on a book about hyperdimensional physics, which later I published with my friend. But even in our book, we mentioned things like mesoteric part, esoteric part, you know, of the book. Okay, so that's some more of the history. So there was Germany. Okay, finally in 1997 I went to United States again. Even before, after my stay in Stony Brook, people didn't want me there, and I didn't want to come back to USA anymore. In 1997, I already knew Laura, and so I decided, well, I go to United States again. Then for a while, 3 years or so, I was working for a corporation. I couldn't find a better job. So I was working for a corporation, doing some practical things with nuclear research, radiation detector. I was partly physics, partly computer programmer. It was waste of time, and I didn't like the direction, so it lasted 3 years and then enough. All right. Now, I have also this esoteric interest that you say, as I said. So here is a short history. Anti-gravity is not really esoteric, you know, it's kind of applied, but it's a dream, and I had this dream from the very beginning of my scientific career. I wanted to conquer gravity. So that was part. Then superluminal travel, superluminal communication, philosophy, mind, open system. For instance, my blog in Polish is called Open Systems. I like open systems, you know, systems which communicate with the outside, so that information can come into an open system are unpredictable. With a closed system, you have recurrence, things tend to repeat itself, but in a system that is open to the environment, you cannot really predict what happens because you don't know what will come from outside. I think this is how our life is, and I think this is, our concept of free will would be impossible in a closed system. We would be deterministic. Open systems are not deterministic, and they are unpredictable. Unpredictable is good, because something good can happen, but they are also dangerous, because something very bad can. But you must pay the price. Either you want to be stuck at one place or circulate. Only you open yourself, there is a danger, but that's the adventure. You have paid the price. Okay, then of course, as I said, Castaneda, Gurdjieff, Uspinski, free will, consciousness, parapsychology, UFOs, and from 1996 I got interested and somehow involved in what we call Cassiopean experiment. Now let me start speaking about this hyperdimensional physics. This is, as I said, a speculation, my speculation, but I think this is the best speculation that I have found after all my research. That the key to UFOs, consciousness, who knows what else, is hyperdimensional physics. Let me talk a little bit about history. It started in around 1880 when a mathematician and a science fiction writer, I think he was John Charles Hinton, wrote a book about 4 dimensions. The fourth dimension of Hinton was not time as we think today. Today we say space-time is 4-dimensional. 3 coordinates for space, 1 coordinate for time. At that time, time was not yet considered as a dimension, so when Hinton was talking about 4th dimension, he was adding 4th dimension to space, and then he was speculating how for 3-dimensional people, how their perception, how poor it would be compared to other possible beings that can see also 4 dimensions. So that's how it all started, hyperdimensional physics. Then Hinton's idea was taken over by Uspensky in his books about esoteric, what was the name? Fourth Dimension, I think is the title of one of the book of Uspensky. Then there came general relativity produced by Albert Einstein, which is at the same time the theory of gravity, which until today is considered as by most physicists as the right theory of gravity. But Einstein was quite unhappy that his ideas allow us to describe mathematically gravity, but there were also electromagnetic phenomena and they were apart from gravity. So there was this idea that gravity and electromagnetic should unite somehow, and when they will unite, when we will have one theory that describes both electromagnetic and gravity, it will open the door towards new technologies, space travel, whatever else. But Einstein was not able to do it, but in 1921, 1926 came the ideas by Kaluza, he was of Polish origin, and Klein, who extended Einstein's idea, introducing the fifth dimension, 3 dimensions of space, 1 dimension of time, and an additional 5 dimensions that is invisible, that is hidden from us, but is responsible for electromagnetic phenomena. Einstein was hesitating whether these are good ideas or not. First, he tried to prevent publishing them, because he thought they are so good that he would like to publish them. Then he decided, no, they are not good. He went into the other direction, so Kaluza and Klein could publish their things because Einstein was no longer interested in them, right? But then in 1941, Einstein found that maybe they are not that bad. So at that time he was at Princeton, and with the help of one mathematician and one other physicist, Bergman and Bargman, okay, they produced, and Einstein, they produced a couple of papers developing the ideas of Kaluza and Klein into a new direction, which I think was a very good direction. And after a few years, they completely abandoned this approach, claiming that they don't know what to do. Now, my guess was that it was too good direction that it had to be suppressed. But this is my speculation. I do not have proof. But it's very strange for me that these 3 people write a couple of papers. They show that yes, there is something, but we stop at that point, and then there is no following whatsoever, no comment, nothing happened. That I don't understand. Okay, then in 1941 there was the idea of adding extra dimension was taken over in Russia, in Soviet Union, and but who cares in the world about what Russians were doing, except maybe of some military guys who really want to know everything. So finally, in 1988, when we were in Geneva together with my friend from Marseille, we decided to write a monograph that was giving a review of different approaches to hyperdimensional physics. So we wrote this during 2 years. We were writing this book. The book has been published. It's still listed as a scientific bestseller. Now, a scientific bestseller, it's a mathematical book. It means that they are able to sell, say, 200 copies per year, you see. In mathematics, it's a bestseller. Okay, so on Amazon, it's still listed as a bestseller. I am still getting checks from the publisher, 10 euros every year, you know. Okay, so this is, let's go back. So finally I came back to this problem of hyperdimensional physics, going from 5 to n to infinite, introducing infinite number of dimensions. And so in 2008 I published a paper, some papers on this subject. I will mention that. So this is the beginning. You see, this is the book from 1886 by Hinton. It's called Scientific Romances. You remember, Hinton was a mathematician and science fiction writer at the same time. So here are subtitles. What is the fourth dimension? A plane world. A picture of our universe. Casting out the self. So he was a little bit of a mystic, as you can see from the title. Okay? So this is our bestseller, you see? That's how it looks. That's the title. And here are the two authors. In the first edition of this book, my name was misspelled. You see? It's easy. Okay. Now, this is the picture from my present work, where it's a kind of figures. These kind of figures you can find a lot of internet. They are usually related to magnetic vortex, hyperdrives, all such things. Now they come very easily and naturally when you study hyperdimensional physics, so that's just for you to see. Now, the next thing I want to say is about a certain German physicist who introduced additional dimension, but not only mathematically. He also had an idea what to do with these dimensions, what is their meaning, how to derive consequences, and what is the relation to human life. So his name is Burkhard Heim, and this is one of the book about him. So as you see, the title is Man and the World, and you have esoteric subjects like postmortem states and such things. So I want to tell more about these Burkhard Heim ideas because I consider them very, very important. Probably most important of everything that was published. The publisher, as you see, was Resch Verlag. Who is Resch? Resch is a redemptorist, a priest, working on paranormal phenomena, working for Alfonsina of the Pontifical, working for Vatican, maybe not completely loved by Vatican because of the interest in paranormal, so Vatican once in a while, why don't you restrict to real miracles, why you investigate like Lourdes, Turin Shroud, that's real things to investigate by telepathy, telekinesis, UFOs. Nevertheless, Father Resch is now working on the probably 30 volumes of Encyclopedia of Paranormal. And so he published the papers of and the works of Burkhard Heim, because no one of real scientist publishers wanted to publish. So here is Burkhard Heim, died in 2001, a physicist that was in the University of Göttingen. I was also there. I had a chance to meet him even. There was my friend, a physics professor, told me, "Oh, do you want to meet Burkhard Heim?" And I said, "Who is that?" At that time I didn't know, who is this? "Oh, but he speaks only German." So I said, "No, I don't go there." And now I should go there. I should, you know. So in 1954, you see, Burkhard Heim made the cover of German magazine Der Stern. He proposed a theory of space travel, new way of space propulsion, giving the idea that yes, we will be able to reach the stars in our life. So he was born in 1925. Then he was recruited into the military. Then there was an accident, explosion, chemical explosion. He lost both hands. He lost sight, and he lost his hearing. Nevertheless, even if so, in 1946 he starts studying physics with no hands and no sight, essentially. Later on he could see a little bit with a loop with one eye. Also hearing a little bit he was able to hear a little bit. So essentially then he married, and his wife was reading to him everything. He developed almost perfect memory. He could remember everything, see formulas in his mind. So in 1954, oh sorry, what I did? Oh, all right. In 1954 he got the degree, but even before getting the degree, he already got famous for a unified field theory using 6 dimensions. And that's what made the cover. And Germany became, at that time, he became rather famous in Germany because German people were thinking, okay, we had von Braun. Von Braun created rockets. Von Braun was taken by USA to create new weapons and new missiles. But now we have Burkhard Heim. He will also create the future wonderful science for Germany. Germany will conquer the universe. Okay? All right. So this is so that you can see how he was working after the surgery. He could see only with one eye. So now, what is Heim doing with his dimension? So he says, all right, we have 3 dimensions of space, we have 1 dimension of time, but we have 2 extra coordinates, 5th and 6th. And these 5th and 6th coordinates, they are important for the organization of matter. Physics deals with interactions, scattering of particles, you know, falling bodies and so on. But we know that matter somehow gets organized. It's not chaotic. So something must be responsible for organization. Standard physics says it's by chance. Everything what happens and is interesting is created by chance. But when you start to calculate these chances, you find that it's extremely small chance that anything really organized would arise, so to say, spontaneously. So there must be some really mechanism responsible for that, and the idea of Heim was that that there are extra two dimensions, one responsible for organization, the other responsible for information. Information governs organization. Information tells how things should get organized in time. So there are two different aspects. And with the help of these two dimensions, Heim was able to describe gravity, light, and elementary particles. Then he went further. He went to introduce additional 6 dimensions. So 6 dimensions, 3 space, 1 time, plus 2 dimensions responsible for our organization and information. They form what he called the material world. But we also have, and physics today only deals with the material world. Okay, that's science of today. But then Heim understood that we also have a non-material world which somehow interacts with the material world. So he introduced 6 extra dimensions for non-material world. This 6 is 4 plus 2. 4 is like 3 plus 1, but in non-material world we do not have splitting between space and time. Everything is, you see? So that's, and then Heim introduced levels of organization of matter, starting from soma, body, the lowest level, minerals, particles, are things. Then we have bios, which means life, bacteria, are things. Then we have psyche, developed in higher animals. And then we have also pneuma, I don't know how it's spirit, something like that, okay, at the highest level. And this division of Heim into this level of organization is very similar to the division which in some esoteric literature we call density. There are the different densities, okay. Heim was able to calculate, so to say, more precisely the splitting of the organization into different levels. However, there is however. First of all, his publisher was not a scientific publisher. His papers and publication never went through the real scientist correction process. So he was kind of channeling as a mathematician, as a physicist, putting this on paper. The publisher agreed to publish everything because he understood that there is something deep and important. But as Heim himself admits, there are many errors. And, well, as for me, they are also all in German. And I am not very good in reading German. I can read German that is pure mathematics, no problem. But when it comes to philosophy, mysticism, and so on, when one sentence takes half a page, I have real, you know, it can take me several hours to understand this one sentence. So, That's high. So therefore, I have all his works. They are on my desk. Once in a while I look. I try to see something, to read something, to understand. But I'm going my way. So let's make a summary of Heim ideas. We need at least two extra dimensions. One is organization, one is information. Now, there is one more thing. Space is quantized according to Heim. There are minimal elements, what Leibniz would call monods, from which space is formed, and then can adjust one to another and organize into structures. That's not the standard physics. For standard physics, mostly space is a continuous thing. At most, it can have some structure which we call, say, vortices or vortex, right? It's an old concept, but that would imply that some kind of an ether is needed, and physicists don't like the concept of ether. So Heim introduced quantized space, discrete organization, and I will not discuss it now. So now I went my way, and I developed something that I think is important for superluminal communication, perhaps also kind of space travel, which I call theory of Kairos. This I developed essentially myself. I told you before that I like to work in collaboration. So when I had these ideas, I really proposed to my co-author of our monograph about hyperdimensional physics, let's work on this. This is such a wonderful idea. And he said, yeah, but I am busy, and I have students in Brazil and in Mexico and in New Zealand, and I like to travel a lot. So let me, take care of my students. You do it yourself. So it's my own work and my own responsibility. Instead of particles, I introduce here a kind of a wavicles. You see, particles, elementary particles of physics, they are structures that are localized in space. They take a certain amount of space, and they are extended in time. Particle can travel from, long in time, but in space, it has a very small dimension. Now, my theory is a kind of a dual theory. So it's a theory of wavicles, like vibrations. Wavicles are extended in space but concentrated in time. So they are like shock waves, signals that are at the same time everywhere in space. They come into being and they disappear. So it's a signal, instantaneous signal. And propagation of such fields is superluminal, which is nice because we like superluminal communication. And I call them chirons. Why did I call them chirons? Well, the term kairos we meet in New Testament when it means the appointed time in the purpose of God. The time when God acts. Well, it's good. God doesn't care about whether it's superluminal or not, right? It acts everywhere in the universe. So this is one reason. So we have standard time, which is usually described as chronos, but you find also this other kind of time that is called kairos. Then we have it mentioned by Carl Gustav Jung, where he says we are living in what the Greeks call the kairos, the right time for a metamorphosis of gods. And worth reading is a very interesting sentence. Coming generation will have to take into account, take account of this momentous transformation if humanity is not to destroy itself through the might of its own technology and science. Important word. So we have these kairos. So what are these kairos? Well, as I said, they are vehicles concentrated in time, extended in space, and allows for instantaneous superluminal communication. However, the funny thing is that that's a diagram taken from my paper, which I will explain. So I didn't remove the unnecessary thing. This is technical, this is technical. Okay, so what do we have? Here is time, today, tomorrow, after tomorrow, and so on. Here is time, sorry. Today, tomorrow, after tomorrow, and so on. Future, past. Here is space. Left side of the audience, right side of the audience, some faraway star is here. Okay. So here we are in this room, staying in space and moving in time. That's the history of my talk. Here is also a history of, but say 10,000 years later. Imagine the same room, but 10,000 years later. Okay. So here our now history now. Here is our future history. Here. So this is us in the future. Now, theory of chirons, to communicate from the future into the past, you need a retransmitter. So you need a retransmitter. So suppose the retransmitter is some kind of a star in the Cassiopeia. So the story is this. The chiron field, the vehicle, the signal, goes from us in the future into the retransmitter, into the past, and then comes back to us here from the retransmitter. That's how it works. And the story is that the time is doubled. So if this is the constellation of Cassiopeia, if we have a star which is 120 light years from us, that means that we can use it as a retransmitter to reach up to 240 years in the past. If we want to reach farther, we have to use a retransmitter which is farther away. So we have a star here which is 520 light years, so we can reach backward in time using 1,000 years. That's what follows from theory, from mathematics. I mean, I am a mathematician a little bit, so, and I don't care about physical application, and as I said, science is only aperitif to the real important thing. How I am with time, I talk until, I don't know. Okay, I continue. So here is the summary of this theory of chirons. First of all, up to 12. Okay, so I have 1 hour. Good. So first, I prove mathematically that superluminal communication is possible. I can defend that against any audience, okay? However smart. There are no probably mathematical errors. So it's a good theory. Whether it has to do anything with reality is another subject. You have a theory, then you have to develop technology based on this theory. Then you have to test this technology, and usually what engineers do, they take the theory, they develop technology, then they make engineering corrections, and then the technology works. For instance, we have wonderful GPS system of satellites, right? They navigate us. It's all based on theory of relativity, you see? So first there come physicists and they calculate, you engineers should take into account time dilation and this time dilation and this time dilation, and then it will work. And then engineers come, well, but it doesn't work. Why? Well, we don't know. And the engineers just turn this knob a little bit and now it works. But nevertheless, when you read, you say it's based on the theory of relativity. Only very few engineers and scientists will admit it doesn't. You see? We had to correct it to make it work. So that was just a side remark. So we have these vehicles, vibrations. I think they may have to do something with what came out in sessions from the Cassiopean transmissions, and that is how I met Laura when I saw some strange woman on the internet is writing about unstable gravity waves. What? I have to write to her. So I wrote an email, and Laura replied, and 1 year later we were together. So then I think it was a surprise for me to realize that this is not a simple communication from future to the past, but really a retransmitter is needed. You cannot communicate directly, you have to do all this way. Which was a surprise, because in this Cassiopean transcript it was said that we transmit us from in the future to you in the present from some kind of transmitter in. Why there? Now I understand. Then in Heim's theory, space is quantized. Now here we are dealing with propagation of instantaneous signals. So probably I would say time is quantized here. You know, there are like the minimal intervals of perception using our human minds. But I am not just a mathematician, I am also a little bit of a physicist. So in fact I am interested in technology. There are strange phenomena happening here and there. We learn about them, and then usually if they are interesting enough, they disappear, they are suppressed, disinformation is being spread. So what are these interesting phenomena that I think that are important? Somehow I have confidence in myself I think every scientist should have confidence, otherwise he would not be able to create anything original, right? So even if I know I can be wrong, I have to follow my intuition. I have to. I have no other choice if I do not follow your intuition. If you do not follow your intuition, you will just be repeating what someone else. But you have to develop your intuition. I mean, the raw intuition, which is enough, is not sufficient. You have to work, test how to listen to your inner voice, when it tells you the truth, and when it is real voice, and so on. Okay, so let's go to technology. Here was an announcement that you can find in a radio magazine in United States in March 1944. Big news. This big news came once, then almost disappeared. You never seen them again, okay? What is this big news about? Pure magnetic current. Epoch-making discovery. See? Professor Felix Ehrenhaft, well-known Viennese physicist, now refugee in this country. Okay? Yeah, there was Ehrenhaft. He was a physicist. He was a friend of most famous physicists, makers of quantum theory, makers of relativity. He was a friend of Albert Einstein. They were discussing together, and he made this wonderful discovery. Sensitive experiment show that in geomagnetic fields, small particles of ferromagnetic substances move as simple magnetic poles. Magnetic poles. He discovered, he saw it with his eyes, magnetic poles. One pole, not a magnet with two poles, but magnetic poles. So he made this discovery. Okay. Today, what we can find? We can find space, gravity, and flying saucer. And here he is mentioned, Viennese physicist, and he found that teeny particles of dust tend to rotate when exposed to the rays of the sun. He investigated what happens when the sun is shining on certain materials. And he discovered, by using very sophisticated observation, that not only normal things happen, that we know things get warmer, you know, photographs can be taken. He was studying the behavior of small particles of matter, and he found that sun can magnetize matter, and he discovered that this magnetized matter behaves in a strange way. So he suggested that pure magnetic force permeates throughout the known universe. Magnetic monopole. That was taken over by Ed Ledskalnin, famous constructor of a coral castle in Florida. If you look for coral castle, this is coral, you see, coral castle. The construction built by Ed Ledskalnin himself, which no one knows how he did it alone, taking big stones that weighed tons and lifting them somehow. It's like, today it's considered he knew some secret like the pyramid builders. That's what you can find. But Ledskalnin also wrote about magnetic monopoles and how important they are. And when I was reading publication of this famous Letzkanin, I could see the idea of Ehrenhard. So probably he took from Ehrenhard. Then the idea of magnetic monopoles came again as a result of collaboration of Russian physicists with French. Russian physicists, when the Soviet Union collapsed, science got reorganized. The big institutes like Kurchatov Institute of High Energy, where they were developing atomic weapons, got some independence, and the scientists started to work on strange ideas. So Russia today is a complete mixture of some very good and original ideas and a complete disinformation, because of course there is a lot of government and corporation organization that do whatever they can in order not to let real good scientific ideas from Russia to be easily detected by outside. Okay? So here we have a collaboration of a private foundation in Paris, Fondation Louis de Broglie, with Russian scientists from Nuclear Institute. They were doing explosions, electric explosion using high voltage, and they were looking what happened to a titanium foil in water. And what they have found, first, they have found some kind of alchemical transformations which are not explainable in terms of nuclear science that we accept today. And they have found also strange particles which they think they are just traces of these mysterious magnetic monopoles. So here is another paper, the same journal, French journals, Fondation Louis de Broglie, about biological effect. Now here you have only Russian, because the Russian, they do experiments because they have facilities in this nuclear research institute. French do the theory, speculation, how to explain this. So this is essential because private institute in France would not have facilities to do such experiment, and non-private institute in France would not be able to publish anything that is of value, right? So, so they see emergence of new chemical elements. And here it's a typical photo. Well, I should not take photographs. There are many photographic plates, and here is path of one particle reconstructed from traces on a stack of these plates. Okay? And the track of these particles look like spiral, and this is exactly what Ehrenhard was seeing when he was announcing his discovery of magnetic monopoles. At some point, it was almost sure, because there was some support from Einstein, that Ehrenhard will get a Nobel Prize for his discovery of magnetic monopole. But then it was all suppressed, and there was no any more mention. You hardly find Ehrenhard's work now mentioned. So let me summarize this magnetic monopoles business. So first it was, I think it was discovered by Ehrenhard. Then as a theoretician, a famous British physicist, Dirac, who got Nobel Prize for theoretical discovery of antimatter. Dirac also wrote a couple of papers about theory of these magnetic monopoles. I think these papers, this theory of Dirac is wrong. I mean, it's mathematically nice, but it does not describe this experiment and these observations. Then now we have the Russian team and the French theoretical team. Then we have strange Italian mafia. I use here one name. Italian mafia, you see, they have really strange idea. They develop very original physical theories that they wouldn't be able to do it in US, for instance. No one will give them money for this research. But in Italy, you see, it's still possible. I am friend of this, and he's friend of mine, and so on, and we publish, and we survive. So there is the Italian school, and there is a Brazilian school, because in Brazil science is also kind of strange. Scientists they have still very high position in society, and if you are good and you have good friends, you can be independent in your research in Brazil. You don't have to work for a big corporation. So these magnetic monopoles, they probably catalyze alchemical transformation. So if that is true, alchemy is not just a dream. Alchemy, well, we have two ways of understanding alchemy, because alchemy, on one hand, is a spiritual transformation in man, alchemical work on yourself, okay? And there is this physical aspect of alchemy, when, say, mercury can be transformed into gold, okay? So there are probably such an alchemy is possible. There are speculation that in fact alchemical type of transformation are already used, except that we are not told how, that they can be used in order to get rid of nuclear waste. We have all this nuclear waste in our planet, and we don't know what to do with it, send it in space or poison ourselves, or what to do. But there are speculations that this new kind of transformation can be used, and perhaps it's already used, to transform nuclear waste. Then these magnetic monopoles, what they are? These magnetic monopoles are not vehicles that I consider as a means for superluminal communication, possible means. These monopoles are rather particles. Maybe they can interact with waves. And then there are four kinds of physicists. First kind of physicists would say most magnetic monopoles, this is a dream, speculation, no one really has seen them. Second, magnetic monopoles exist, but they are very rare, It's very difficult to spot one, maybe 1 in 10,000 years, you know, and they are heavy, very heavy, and they travel very slow. Not interesting. Then you have the third kind of physicists. Oh, they are frequent, and they travel with the speed of light. And then the last kind, oh, they are superluminal. And you will find papers published in serious journals on all 4 subjects, okay? Very serious. I don't know. I think they are superluminal, but I started to work on these magnetic monopoles with this in mind. I didn't come yet to a conclusion. And what is also important that these magnetic monopoles possibly are very important, provided they exist, and I think we have enough evidence to be sure that they exist. They may be important for understanding the origins of quantum theory. Quantum theory is not completely understood. Physicists, philosophers are still working on foundations. And in particular, there is a mystery of number 137. What is this mystery of 137? When you consider the ratio of square of the electric charge to the product of Planck constant and speed of light, you find that it's approximately almost 137. 137.0 some blah, blah, blah. So physicists were really surprised. And it's not like 137 meters, centimeters, or kilograms, or whatever. It's just pure number, 137. Not meter, not millimeter. So it's a pure number. So when from theory comes a pure number, we would like to be able to calculate it from some principles, like you see when we look at the pyramids, we look at certain ratios, and we can see golden ratio there, and we can see what is called Fibonacci sequence there. And then we look at sunflower, and we see Fibonacci numbers. You see pure numbers. So when we see a pure number, we would like to know it probably comes from some kind of quotation mark sacred geometry. Okay? When I say sacred geometry, there is nothing sacred about this. It's just geometry, but really understood and researched deeper. Okay? So when we see things like 137, oh, there must be some kind of a mathematical, maybe a little bit mystical reason for this number to be that or not the other one, like number pi. Okay? There is a reason for pi to be 3.14 and so on. But with this number 137, which is called fine structure constant, many physicists try to find the reason why it is 137, not some other number. And there are a lot of stories. For instance, there was a very famous quantum physicist, and not only quantum, Wolfgang Pauli, Nobel Prize winner. he got obsessed with this number 137. He really did everything possible to find a justification why this number is important, which relates quantum theory, relativity, and electricity somehow. Then he got sick, and they put him in a hospital. And they put him in a room with the number 137. But not for a reason, it was a coincidence, you see. It was not that someone was joking. Well, he died there. Okay. Now let's go to consciousness. To start with, I will mention a famous priest and paleontologist, Teilhard de Chardin. He wrote several interesting books. One of them is called Phenomenon of Man. And he says that world is manifest deep within our human consciousness and there reflects upon itself. In other words, human consciousness, and perhaps not only human, we should not be restricted when talking to consciousness to just human consciousness, because I think human consciousness is just part of a larger phenomenon that in particular, so the universe looks or reflects itself through the consciousness. Consciousness is a kind of a mirror through which universe, or I don't know what, is using to observe, to see what happened. I think universe is an open system. You can find it in some writing of Gurdjieff, when Gurdjieff is telling us some kind of a myth of creation. He wrote in his Beelzebub tales to his grandson, almost incomprehensible writing by Gurdjieff, but worth reading. And he tells us the story of the creation, which we do not know where it comes from. Perhaps it comes from some kind of Oriental esoteric tradition, perhaps from some kind of early Christian tradition, I don't know. So the story of the universe, as told by Gurdjieff, is the following. First, the Creator created, I would say, perfect universe, which essentially it means closed universe. But very soon he noticed that this universe, which is so perfect, is dying. It's like a thermal death of the universe. Entropy is taking over and it decays. And then he decided to give it another try and created a universe that is open, that even he, the Creator, cannot tell what will happen in the future. That's the future, the open system. And so the universe he created is open. The future is not predictable but we are participating in creating this future. Each of us is a participator, and because we are a non-linear system, hard to predict, every little change that if each of us can make can prove to be important, because it can deflect the path of the whole universe. So each of us is in fact, perhaps without knowing it, if he chooses to, can be responsible for the future of the whole universe, because the future was not created in the mind of God. We have free will, and if we want, we can use it, which is not easy. Using our free will is not easy. It takes a while, because why should I choose? Let someone tell me what to do. I mean, choosing something is taking responsibility. We don't like to take responsibility. Well, some people like it, some people like it less. But okay. So, what Teilhard de Chardin is saying, that in fact, you see, to see that we are in such a relationship with the universe is one of the most difficult of all things. He tells us more. He tells us that the phenomenon of consciousness is not just epiphenomenon. It's not just that we'll follow once we understand working of human brains and neurons and, connection in the body, and then we will be able to create artificial intelligence and robots will be conscious. It's not his view. He says that consciousness, in order to be integrated into a world system, necessitates consideration of the existence of a new aspect or dimension in the stuff of the universe. So we have this priest, Teilhard de Chardin, which tells us from the philosophical level the same as the German physicist Burkhard Hahn told us on the basis on his own original research. To take into account consciousness, we need to add, it's necessary to go beyond space and time. We need to add new aspect or dimension in the stuff of the universe. So, hyperdimensional physics. Now, okay, that's not important. This is just my paper about magnetic monopoles. I don't know, I misplaced it, this slide, but it was written while I was in the University of Florida. It come here by mistake. So now I come to UFOs. The best published paper about UFOs that I have seen, which does not mean I consider it very good, but the best published, is the one by Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis. From a kind of strange institute, National Institute for Discovery Science. It's an iffy institute, I would say. I don't think they privately founded, I don't think they are really telling us what they are after, but doesn't matter. There was this paper presented at the forum Science, Religion and Consciousness in Portugal, 2002. Jacques Vallée, I think astronomer, no, yeah, kind of, yeah. He studied UFOs while in France, then he went to US, probably now in Canada somewhere. And Eric Davis is a, by education, physicist. So they wrote this paper. They look at UFOs, data, and attempts of explanations of the data. And they call it here unidentified aerospace phenomena. Okay, well, something new, okay? And they stress, first of all, complexity of the data. Of course, we know that the data are complex. We have many witness reports that we don't know whether we can rely on them or not, and they cannot stand in the court as proofs. We have photographs, and photographs can be easily faked. We have videos, videos can be faked. Well, so we have complexity of the data. Then we have incomplete models of reality. Sure, we have incomplete models of reality because still Vallée and Davis, they avoid hyperdimensional physics. And other scientists like Richard Hoagland, they would talk about hyperdimensional physics, but they would talk about life on Mars or somewhere, but they don't care very much about abduction and UFO data. Then we have, well, we know, extreme polarization among researchers. Yeah, sure, there are different views. There are those who would say all data are fake, or all data are explainable, or maybe there is some percentage that cannot be explained, so we put it into the drawer, but there must be some explanation. Okay, so this is one view. Then we have, of course, some other researchers would say, oh, these data have been created in order to disinform people by the militaries because they want people to go after some chase, you know, and so we can do whatever we want, and people will be looking for crop circles that we create and UFOs that we fly, you know, and we will be doing what really is important. So we have this extreme polarization. Okay, skeptics argue that the behavior is an absurd, while believers insist that the extraterrestrial hypothesis is a good explanation. Now, as a scientist, I would skip completely, so to say, extraterrestrial. They are not really extraterrestrial. They are coming from a different reality, whatever is coming. It's coming from different reality. If you want, different density, different dimension, different level of organization, which to us looks like a little bit like a miracle. Things appear, disappear. UFO phenomena are very similar to what we find studying some paranormal phenomena like poltergeist, where things come through the wall, fish comes from the heaven, you know, from the sky, things appear, things disappear, things move. So it's all like an interface between our reality, our level of organization, and some higher level of organization, then somehow overlap once in a while, and we see these UFOs. Burkhard Heim also wrote a little bit about these UFOs, and his publisher, the father, the priest, Andreas Resch, they also, but they were coming from the direction of the Vatican, so they would say, oh, yes, but you know, yes, we have these wonderful miracles, but there is also this devil, and devil tries to, you know, attract our attention, so you be very careful when dealing with such phenomena. I would say that the researchers somehow related to a particular religious doctrine cannot be completely open-minded. It's impossible. Maybe I will recall the story of Galileo Galilei. Galileo Galilei was trying to develop the Copernican idea that it's not the Earth that is at the center of the universe, that it is the sun. But for many, many years, he would talk about it, only in private, only to his students, would never dare to publish anything on this subject. And when finally he decided to publish, the Inquisition came over, and he spent wonderful years in a house arrest, living in a house with an archbishop, with a cellar full of wine. So instead of doing research, after publishing what was not very well welcomed by the Catholic Church at that time, he essentially had to take back his word, repent, and be good and drink wine with the archbishop. So what this Vallée and David tell us about in a 6-level model. Now, there 6 has nothing to do with 6 dimensions, but the number is the same, 6-level model. All right. They say that, well, we have to take into account both religious phenomena and the paranormal, which to some extent may be true. So what is the summary of this UFOs research? First thing, UFOs and consciousness, I think, I speculate, I cannot provide a proof, is they are related. That does not mean that UFOs are not real. I do not mean that UFOs is just a hallucination. I mean that participation of the consciousness is important in order to the phenomenon to take place. We cannot repeat it, some of these paranormal experiments, in a laboratory operated by automatic devices, unless there is some lady nearby, maybe some teenager girl, which makes things to happen spontaneously. It was quite often that biologists, chemists, physicists were discovering very strange phenomena, and they were able to repeat the experiments. And they were repeating and repeating and repeating. Everything was working. And then one day, they couldn't repeat it anymore. It was not working. What happened? And they found that all the time there was a certain assistant woman that was somewhere in the next room, but then she left the institute, and then things will not happen anymore. So some kind of a participation, you see, of a human factor is important for this kind of phenomena. So, but science today is not yet ready to produce a new methodology for doing with such things. Science today wants everything should be repeatable and independent of any human participants, their moods, you know, whether they drink coffee or not, you know, before. We don't know what to do. Therefore, it's very difficult to investigate paranormal phenomena. If people do it, such experiments, they do it statistically. Things with media, so-called media, you know, special media, sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. And what worse, sometimes a medium would cheat. And that is a disaster. So, research has been done on big numbers of people and taking statistical averages. Now with statistical averages, first of all, they are small, the effects are very small. Second, it's very easy to cheat with statistics. You have whole books with the title How to Lie with Statistics. Whenever you have someone publishing something and saying statistic proves that this and this, there will be another guy who will little bit will say, oh no, you have taken wrong data, or you use the wrong model, let's do this model, and I will prove that the opposite is true. So, playing with statistics is not, will not convince anybody who doesn't want to take it into account. So, UFO and consciousness, I think they are related and we need a new methodology. Yes, there is probably some kind of relation between, from we call miracles, between UFOs and poltergeist phenomena. I think, yes, we need at least 2 extra dimensions. That is organization and information, or if you prefer densities or level of organization. It is not just we say, oh, there is another extraterrestrial intelligence, perhaps based not on proteins, but maybe silicon or whatever, or maybe they are beings made of light or whatever you think. But in our material world, I think we will not be able to explain this phenomena staying within 3 space and 1 time dimension. Now, when you study consciousness and UFOs, you will find that they are not always good. That there is kind of a balance, like everywhere in nature, and so it's very easy to be misled. And if you don't want to take what is evil for good, you need to develop intuition, and you better have a lot of knowledge. Both knowledge and intuition are necessary. Knowledge enough is not enough, because with knowledge you work on logic, and frankly speaking, using logic, you just convert one kind of information into another kind of information. You will never create new things. They look like new, but they are already there hidden. If you want to be creative, you have to do something that will increase not just your knowledge, but the universal knowledge. So this is things that you cannot just learn. We are not just observers or students, we also have to add to the existing knowledge. It's very important. So, okay, there are these evil aspects of UFOs and paranormal phenomena. So when the church is telling us that there is a devil, yeah, there may be something like a devil, but devil need not always to be bad, you know. Sometimes you can use, if you are smart enough, and you don't sign, you know, with your blood, okay? So, then we have the question of free will. Free will is related to consciousness somehow. And I was obsessed a little bit with the concept of free will. I was really upset, and I thought, well, I was watching myself, and I was noticing that on some days I can exercise my free will easily. I can choose this or that or that, or if I decide, for instance, to do yoga every morning, you see? It comes very easily some mornings, and some other morning I say, I skip it today, I'm too tired. Well, anyhow, I'm too busy, you see? So it's a kind of a discipline, and discipline is self-discipline, and self-discipline, I think, is related to free will. And we observe that there are days where we can exercise this self-discipline and follow our plans, and there are other times where we can't. So I was thinking, well, this free will business is like fluctuating at me. At certain times or at certain hours, I see I have more free will than another time where I work like a machine. Automaton, okay, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. I do not look into one, I do not self-observe, you know, I am just a machine. And some other day I am not. So I was thinking, well, that's interesting. I would like to develop, you know, like a little device, like a Geiger counter that measures radiation, that would measure the amount of free will I have on a given day. Yeah, it will show me on a scale. Oh, today I have so little free will. Okay, I can drink wine. But now, some other day or some other hour, it tells me, oh, 100. Oh my God, I can create a lot of things, so let me get this. Right? So I wanted to invent such a little device, you know, free will meter. So But then I was thinking it would be nice if it would be not only meter, but if I would press, you see, a thing, and it will pump a little bit of free will into me, right? So I would say free will, detector, and generate. Oh, that would be very handy. No, I was serious. I am now joking, but I was very serious. So I created, at that time when I was doing this, I had a lot of free will. So I created a schedule. Up to this year, I will be developing the theory. Next 2 years, I will test the theory doing preliminary experiments. In 6 years, I will have the device ready and it will be in the production. That's true. So I started to develop a theory, and I was thinking, free will, to what it is related. Probably, it's somehow what we do with our free will. Certainly, quantum processes are important at us, at some level of molecules, atoms and molecules. Quantum processes are nowadays interpreted as essentially random processes. This is where all randomness, like a law of accident, this is what governs nuclear decays. We cannot predict when the given nucleus will decay. We can predict only an average time in which half of the nuclei will decay. Okay? So we have this randomness. And physicists would say, this is how it is. God really played dice. Okay? The universe at the very fundamental level is based on pure randomness. But I was thinking, well, evidently, free will tells us that this is not the case. We can direct this randomness. We can change the probabilities. We cannot change the facts, but we can change somehow, shift probabilities from one side to the other side using our minds, using our I don't know what. Okay? So, I had an idea how to do it. Okay? I have to go to the foundation of the quantum theory and see how we can affect quantum probabilities, what kind of mechanism is going to happen. So I started working on this. I did really good work. Created a new theory that is better than the normal quantum theory, which I called event-enhanced quantum theory. It was able to describe experiment that normal quantum theory was not able to explain. I got even a prize, scientific prize, together with some money coming with the prize for developing this theory. But somehow I didn't know how to relate it to free will. At a certain point, you see, I made an observation. Well, I want to create this device, meter and generator of free will. But who will buy it? I couldn't find one person. I mean, imagine, something tells you that you don't have free will. Come on, I can turn you off. You see, someone tells you, I will generate free will, more free will with you. It means I will have more responsibility, I have enough. So I decided no one would buy such a device. And if anyone will be interested, maybe, the bad guys that would measure the amount of free will. You do not have free will? Okay, I will now use you as my victim, you know, because you cannot oppose, you see. So only bad guys would use it. And anyway, then I realized that we are the devices. Each of one can measure the amount of free will we have, and we know how to generate more free will. If we are sick, we do not have much free will. If we have a headache, we do not have much free will. So if you keep the right diet, you will generate more free will, right? The solution is simple. So that's about free will. And now we have, there is technology that is important and somehow also involved in the UFO phenomena. And it's somehow related to alchemy, certainly. There are certain strange transmutation of nuclei that has been observed in the presence of UFO-related objects. So let me come to conclusions now, which means introducing probably new concepts. And science is not yet ready. There are teams of scientists, you know, philosophers, psychologists, mathematicians, and where they try to start such a new kind of science, but it's in the beginning. Then we need new methodology, because we cannot rely on the old methodology which tells us that every experiment must be repeatable in any laboratory. That will not work with human beings, that will not work with consciousness. But nevertheless, there must be some kind of a scientific protocol, so this new methodology must be developed. Certainly we need new mathematical models, and probably we need to use the logic that is not based on pure yes and no, tertium non datur, as they say, because the world around us is not just black and white. It's at least, it has gray levels, and maybe it has even colors. And we cannot describe everything in terms of 0-1 bits. We have to go beyond that. This kind of work is being done in the field of artificial intelligence. They use some kind of what they call fuzzy logic. So a logic where not only the answer can be yes and no, but it can be, say, 10 degrees yes, 10% yes. The logic based on probabilities, see? Okay. Then we need to have a marriage of exact science and the mysterious. But the point is that it is not that the scientists should go into and become a mysterious and stop talking science. It's rather than it should be like with Laura, we try to do everything with some kind of scientific rigor. And finally, I would want to sell you one sentence here. I say complete rationality is irrational. You can always find people that are completely rational, and that will say everything should be rationally explained. Why? This is an irrational belief. What is the reason? Please tell me, explain me rationally why everything should be explainable by science. It's irrational belief. So, I say that the belief that contemporary science knows or can know all the answers, that this belief is irrational. And that's the last slide, taken from famous American physicist, a co-creator of nuclear bomb for USA, but also a very original thinker. I would like to know what this whole show is all about before it's out. And we don't know when it will be out. So we better hurry. Thank you.